I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. Our Fueled Wellness and Nutrition podcast is all about helping us live our healthiest, strongest lives possible. Food, sleep, exercise, supplements, and mindset to maximize our energy and our vitality. But that us that we're talking about always refers to us humans. But what about our pets? How can we ensure that our dogs, our cats, or really any other type of pet you may have, that they are also living their healthiest and strongest lives possible? So this week, we are focusing on our furry friends. We're joined by Dr. Matthew Levy of Levy Veterinary Hospital to share with us his guidance and his approach to pet nutrition. All right, so welcome, Dr. Levy. Thank you so much for carving the time out of your day to spend with us. Absolutely. Glad to help. Thanks for having me on. So tell us a bit about you, your background, how you got into this and to being, what brought you into being a veterinarian, and then also the work that you do at Levy Veterinary Hospital. Absolutely. Yeah. So, I've been around animals my whole life. I have been around veterinary hospitals, part of what I did even before I knew that I wanted to be a veterinarian. I did some volunteering and some work over at Audubon Zoo, even from high school. So, I've been around and immersed in animals throughout my entire life. I decided fairly early on that veterinary medicine was an interest for me. That really became a top interest for me once I was in high school. I went to LSU and graduated from the LSU School of Veterinary Medicine. I've been in practice for about 6 years now, and opened my own practice out here in Kenner, the Kenner Metairie line, Levy Veterinary Hospital, about a year ago, and things have been going great. Congratulations on that. That's cool. Yeah. Thank you. As far as the nutrition side of things, nutrition to me is important for our pets. Just as a overall priority, I try to integrate the discussion about nutrition into every single appointment, because in some way, shape, or form, it does come into play, whether we're talking about managing a healthy pet and keeping that wellness as great as possible, or managing an older pet or any sort of health conditions. In some way, shape, or form, nutrition always plays some role. Is this something that people are asking about a lot? Is it like front of mind if they haven't, if they've been to you as an existing patient, they kind of know this is coming up, but is it sometimes a surprise that pet owners aren't even thinking about that? I think they are thinking about it. I think they don't always think about that. The veterinarian is a great source of information. Right. I think some people are doing all of their research and looking into to find out, what to feed their pet, but they sometimes forget that they have a ready resource right there of somebody who's studied the nutrition in our pets and has all of that knowledge to help them make those decisions and recommendations. And take so much of the guesswork out of it. Yeah. Right. I wish people would ask about it more. And typically when we do engage and talk about it, they did have questions. They did have things that they wanted to talk about. And there were things that they perhaps had misheard, or some misinformation out there that we can set the record straight on. So I think pet owners are thinking about it. But I think, I invite those questions from pet owners. Really involving your veterinarian can be a great asset in helping, choose the diet and the nutrition for your pet. And what are some of the biggest issues nutritionally that you're seeing in your practice? Is it overweight pets, or are there skin conditions related to diet, or arthritis, joint conditions, allergies? Like, what are the things that you're seeing a lot of?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the top nutrition thing that we see is, not really a surprise, but obesity. So obesity is the most common preventable disease that we see in our pets. I see dogs and cats. I do have training in all species. And so, we see it across the board beyond just our dogs and cats. But, obesity is the number one we see. Over half of dogs and cats worldwide are considered obese. And
Wow.
It is a major concern because it does come into play with so much of other health conditions. And you mentioned arthritis. I mean, the single greatest thing that we can do for a dog with joint disease is make sure they're at a healthy weight. And that can help with any more than any supplement that we can give, more than any pain medicine or drug or anything else that we can do. If a dog has joint disease or arthritis, or a cat for that matter too, the single greatest thing that we can do is get them at a healthy weight so they're not carrying all of that extra weight around. I mean, kind of expanding on obesity, there was a study that was done a few years back now that looked at Labradors. And what it found was those Labradors that were at a healthy weight lived on average 2 years longer than those labs that were considered overweight. So it is, that is probably the top nutritional thing that we do see. We love our pets, and sometimes we equate, giving them food as showing them love.
Yeah, we do it with people. Yeah.
Exactly. So it can be more of a psychological thing to get past, and I'm sure same is on the human side where, we need to get past the food is love and understand that keeping our pets at a healthy weight is giving them so much more in a quality and quantity of life.
Well, one of the things I shared with you, well, also one of the things that's good about being a pet is they don't get to go to the store or stop at the convenience store or the drugstore. I had one client, an older lady, who said when she goes to the drugstore, she hits the candy aisle and she says she's looking for love in all the wrong places, So our pets can't do that. We're the ones feeding them. And I shared the story with you as you and I were kind of getting our game plan together for this podcast, but I'll share it with our listeners. I love it. So my sister-in-law, Tracy, has a golden retriever, and she does have a lot of joint issues. She has, and weight was an issue. And she was 90 pounds. And it's a big deal in our family that Ella, her name is Ella Sue, like Ella Shoe, but Ella has now met her goal weight, and she lost 21 pounds to, from 90. And so she's at her goal weight, big celebration. But my sister-in-law, actually, she was struggling with it because, it just was, the weight really wasn't coming off, and she felt like she was being really measured and diligent with her diet. And so she got Ella into intermittent fasting and pushed back her window of the first time she ate in the day and kind of squeezed what we call the fueling window. And just as people do intermittent fasting, she did. And, sure enough, 21 pounds later, she's a lot healthier and happier. Is that something that you see? Yeah. Well, but then like you said too, the food is love. And, we people to people, we do that. Food is love, and people to pets, we do it. And my mother-in-law just says, oh, poor Ella, she needs to come see me so I can give her some food. And she does. Now she'll give her an extra, apple or carrots and stuff. But that's how she wants to give her the love. And she feels sorry for her because she's lost this weight,
Right. No, and I think that's great. That weight loss is going to come pay dividends so much over years. And I think we need to think about our pets too. You mentioned that she was around 90 pounds and lost 20 pounds. I mean, if we kind of put that into perspective of a 180-pound person losing 40 pounds, it even kind of shows us how dramatic that weight was and how much extra that was on it. And if we then scale it back and think, well, not in a 90-pound dog, but a 9-pound dog, a 9-pound dog going from 9 to 7 pounds. it's only 2 pounds, but that's a huge amount of weight for that dog. And so we need to think about it in that way. And also, when you're only 7 pounds, you don't need a lot of calories in the day. And so even just a few treats here and there, especially in our little guys, can be a huge amount of calories for them. And so we need to definitely think about those extra little bites, those extra little treats that do add up for our pets.
And do you see, I mentioned that Tracy did intermittent fasting, which, we kind of would laugh about, but she also at one point was trying to push the window back even a little bit later, where I suggested, I said, maybe pushing it back an hour. She said, you come over to the house at that hour. It's horrible. She's walking around crying, ready to eat. But do you see many pet owners that do kind of human style approaches, like, I don't know if it's keto or paleo or intermittent fasting with their pets, or...
Yeah, so, I get asked about that every now and then. I do think one of the important things to remember is that our pets are not people. And so there are differences in diet and in weight loss when it comes to our pets versus people. For some pets, one thing might work. For another thing, another pet, the same thing may not work for them. So, diet is not the same for every single pet. When it comes to things like intermittent fasting, for some animals, that can actually be dangerous. So always involve your veterinarian in any sort of weight loss discussions. For example, in cats, if we were to try to get a cat to lose weight through fasting, they can actually put themselves into a form of liver failure called hepatic lipidosis. So always involve your vet. Make sure that some of the trendier things that are out there for humans sometimes can be appropriate for animals, but not always.
And I will say Tracy did do it with the guidance and approval by her vet.
Exactly. So that's fine.
So what are some of the ways that you would say, just overarching, like how is pet nutrition different from human nutrition?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, our pets are not people. A dog is not a human, is not a cat, and so every species is different. I treat primarily dogs and cats, as I mentioned, but a gerbil is going to have a very different diet than some of our other pets. A horse is going to have an extremely different diet. So every species really should have their own nutrition. When it comes to especially more of our exotics, some of our small pocket pets or reptiles, the number one health issue for them is improper husbandry.
Can I ask,
not eating the right thing.
What is the pocket pet? Sorry to interrupt you.
So pocket pets are what I refer to come to those kind of like small mammals like gerbils, hamsters, some of those rodents. Those have become very popular lately. And so when it comes to those pets, again, so not just those little small mammals, but also our reptiles, amphibians, the major issues that we see, the major health issues, probably 90% of sick exotic pets is because of an improper diet or improper husbandry in their environment. So much can be prevented on those exotic pets with proper diet and husbandry. As far as the human side, the dogs and cats, which I primarily deal with, kind of addressing cats first. Cats are obligate carnivores, meaning they have to eat meat. And so, I've had people ask me, well, I have made the choice to go vegan and I'd like my pets to be vegan with me. That is not an option for cats. It cannot be done safely. So we need to kind of think about that, where we can make those decisions for ourselves, but not necessarily the pets can't follow suit. Cats can, and oftentimes do, if they're live primarily outdoors, they can hunt and feed themselves. On the flip side, dogs, where sometimes it gets stressed on dogs about being carnivores, dogs are not carnivores. Dogs are omnivores. They cannot hunt and feed themselves efficiently. Over thousands and thousands of years, they have evolved with their diet primarily being from scavenging from human trash. So dogs have, early on in their domestication, their diet consisted of the throwaway pieces that the people didn't want to eat. And there's a really great study that was in Nature in 2013 where they actually looked at the DNA of dogs and compared it to wolves. And they found several markers in there that show that very early on in domestication for dogs, they gain the ability to eat starches, where wolves are carnivores, but dogs actually can thrive on diets rich in starch compared to the carnivorous diet of wolves. So that's certainly a big difference, where sometimes we need to feed appropriately for the species that we're feeding, and not try to pigeonhole them into maybe what we feed ourselves or what their ancestors may have eaten.
Right. Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. So if someone is looking for a vegan diet for their cat, you would say you don't recommend that?
No, I don't recommend that. It can be done in dogs. It's very difficult to do in dogs, but I wouldn't recommend it really for any of our pets, but especially cats. They cannot eat vegan without being at risk for some serious health problems.
And I'm going to share a story. When you said pocket pets, it also made me think, first of all, do a lot of people walk around with like hamsters or gerbils in their pockets?
No, that's just I didn't coin that term, but that's just kind of what we call them because of their size. But no, I wouldn't say people walk around with them in their pockets.
When I was in grade school, I was like first grade, second grade, and I grew up with cats. We had so many cats just through my life growing up. And, our cat had kittens, and I was really excited about it. And they were like really young, just to the point where you could pick them up and hold them. And so I thought it would be a really cool thing to bring them to school and show my friends. And so, but I think it was kept under wraps until we got into the cafeteria at lunch. And the people, that worked in the cafeteria, they were always so nice. And I was like, oh, they're going to love seeing these cats. And so, but when I pulled them out of my pocket, it looked to them like I had mice in my pockets. And it was complete upheaval, incredible commotion in the cafeteria. And my dad got called to the school. He had to come get the kittens and bring them home. He's like, what do you think of bringing your cats to school in your pocket? Yeah. So those were my pocket pets.
There you go.
So when it comes to reading the nutrition labels, how is reading a pet food nutrition label different than reading our regular human food nutrition labels?
Yeah, so there's been a lot that's been done on the human side to make the nutrition information as readily accessible as possible. And so nutrition labels on the human side have improved so much, over the decades. We're working on that for animals. The labels for animals are really honestly still pretty terrible and pretty useless. There are a few things that you should pay attention to on the pet food label, but the majority of what you see, especially the words on the front and the big pictures of things, are really not that closely regulated and don't mean a whole lot. Things like human grade or holistic have no regulatory meaning. They're just buzzwords, marketing words.
So similar to our people food, the stuff that's on the front of the label, disregard it.
Right. So there is something that is required to be on all pet food called a nutritional adequacy statement, or the ASPCA statement, it's sometimes called. So it is probably going to be the tiniest thing on the entire bag. It may be written in very small print, probably on the back or on the side, all the way at the bottom. But it's going to say one of three things on it. It's going to say something like, product X is formulated to meet ASPCA nutrient profiles for Y species and Z life stages. So something like, approved for dogs for maintenance would be one of the things that they would say. So that's the first thing. It's formulated to meet the nutrient profiles. The second thing it could say is animal feeding tests using ASPCA procedures substantiate that product X provides complete and balanced nutrition for Y species and Z life stage. And then the third option is this product is intended for intermittent and supplemental feeding only. So it's going to have one of those three on there. And it's actually very important. You can get the most information from if you can find that statement. And so I would challenge anybody who, is at home right now where they can pull out that bag of food or that can of food and see if they can find that ASPCA statement. And so what we're looking for, so it mentions species. So obviously we want to make sure that, the species that we're feeding is listed specifically on there. But it's also going to list a life stage. So life stages could be maintenance or growth and reproduction, or sometimes it'll say all life stages, which just means that it meets growth and reproduction, so it pretty much automatically will meet the adult requirements. Puppies and kittens need higher calories and more nutrients than adults, so basically if it's approved for that, it'll probably say all life stages. But the second statement I mentioned, the one that says animal feeding tests using ASPCA procedures, that actually is something that is really hard to find, a food that says that on there, because it really is not easy to do that, but it really is the best thing. So that when it says it's formulated to meet nutrient profiles, what that means is that somebody took all of the ingredients and plugged it into a computer, and the computer said, yep, that should have everything they need. And then they put that statement on there. What an animal feeding test is a very strict procedure where they use a variety of dogs over a long period of time, where they actually feed this food to them, and they measure so many markers along the way. They check, their weights, they check their stool, they check blood markers for actual absorption of nutrients, to make sure that it actually is complete and balanced nutrition. And so it can be sometimes hard to actually be complete and balanced if the computer says it so. There's actually plenty of diets out there that once they go back and test them, they pull a bag off the shelf and test it, it may not actually be a complete and balanced food. So if you can find one with those animal feeding tests, that tends to be a better choice.
Are there certain brands that are more likely to have it that you like the best?
Yeah. So, and we can go into that a little bit more in a moment.
Okay.
There's a whole guideline that's put out by the World Small Animal Veterinary Association that talks about that. And there's actually a resource called the Pet Nutrition Alliance, where they've compiled all of the different pet food manufacturers into one big chart, so you can see who does feeding tests, who does not, and some of the other criteria.
And is that something we can link to for our listeners?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
So I can definitely provide that for you. I want to briefly go back to that third option,
yes,
which was that this product is intended for intermittent or supplemental feeding only. So that means it's a treat, basically. It should not be given as the major source of nutrition, with one exception. So there are certain health conditions that require a very specific diet. For example, a pet with kidney disease is going to eat much less sodium, much less phosphorus than the average pet would, kind of similar to on the human side. And so that would not be a complete and balanced diet for the average pet. But if it's prescribed by your veterinarian, it may have that statement on there. But that's because it's not for the average pet, but it is prescribed for a specific health condition. That would be the only time it would be considered okay to see that statement on your pet's food.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. So I want to talk about a couple other things about the pet food label before we talk about actually going in and picking to it. So one of the biggest things I hear from people is about the ingredient list. You got to check the ingredients. That's the most important thing on the bag. Check those ingredients. And that seems to be very popular. There's a lot of advertising that has reinforced that pet owners jumping to the ingredient list to decide on picking their food. And there's a lot of online review websites that tend to focus on the ingredient list. And when you actually get down to it and you talk to the veterinary nutritionists that are in the thick of it, the ingredient list is important, but it is by no means the most important. And it can be very deceptive a lot of times. Some of those companies that focus more on marketing than actual nutrition use some tricks to sort of manipulate the ingredient list, where those ingredients are listed by weight. So whatever weighs the most is going to show up first. So if, for example, a manufacturer, before they make that pelleted food and dry everything out, if they wait to sort of dry out that chicken or dry out that meat until later in the process, it's got all that water weight. So they can list that ingredient at the top. Whereas it may not be contributing that much to the diet nutritionally, but because it weighed more when they started, they're able to put that ingredient on top. And they can also take other ingredients that maybe they don't want to show up at the top of the list and do what's called ingredient splitting,
right,
where they, instead of putting, corn, they break it down into the different pieces of corn, the corn gluten meal and the different parts that go into it. And by splitting those out, each of those individually weighs less, so they can show further down in the list. But when you put them all together, they actually would be closer to the top.
So similar to some of the sneakiness that we see on people food ingredient lists as well. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I would even say it's in the pet food industry, it's gotten even worse than on the human side. The other thing that people I hear frequently about the ingredient list is, I can't feed anything with byproducts. We got to stay away from byproducts. Those byproducts are so unhealthy. I think it's important that people understand what is a byproduct. What does that term even mean? And basically, all a byproduct is anything that's not the tasty bits of what we Americans consider the tasty muscles. So anything that's not a muscle meat that a human eats that comes from the animal is considered a byproduct. So that can be, organ meats like liver, kidney, heart, plasma, entrails, and those actually for our pets, especially for our dogs and cats. I mean, that should be part of their diet. They need that nutrition from those organ meats. The other thing I hear about, don't those byproducts, isn't that like things from their trimmings off the floor and hair and hooves and intestinal contents? So a byproduct specifically is regulated that it cannot include hair, hooves, horn, hide trimmings, manure, intestinal contents, or anything that's not specifically part of the carcass, so floor sweepings or trash. That is not a byproduct. And so that goes back to some of those trickier companies, right, where they say no byproducts, and then you look and you see the third ingredient is liver.
Right.
That's a byproduct.
Yeah.
So they're just getting around it.
And when we see something on a label that says like no byproducts, just because it's blasting that loudly on the front of the label immediately makes you think, well, byproducts must be bad if this is touting this. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay.
And so that's become a trendy thing. And then I think, we also need to talk about the ethics a little bit of sustainability, where if we don't use any of those parts of the animal, if we just throw that away, sustainability for our food supply across the world, as well as for agricultural production and the environment. I mean, we really, from an ethics standpoint, should be using those whole animals, and when they are good sources of nutrition for our pets, even if maybe Americans don't like eating liver that much, but it's certainly enjoyed in several other areas of the world. And there's no reason why our pets can't have that.
So it sounds like there's a lot of fears that are there because people may not have the full information. And again, once we start the Google, like we can get a lot of misinformation. So I'm sure you're doing a lot of that, of kind of course correcting as people are in your office.
Yeah, and it's been over the last maybe 10 or 15 years when marketing has really come into the pet food industry more than ever before, where now all of a sudden these things are being vilified and complicating nutrition for our pets.
So on the, still kind of looking at the nutrition labels, do you recommend that people use the feeding guides on pet foods? Should they look at the calories and protein that are listed, or are calories listed?
So they're not required to be listed. That's shocking to me, but they are not required to be listed on the pet food label. Now, most reputable manufacturers will put the pet food, the calories, and they usually list it as kilocalories per cup. A kilocalorie is the same as what we ordinarily talk as a calorie, but kilocalories per cup or kilocalories per can when we're talking about it on the wet food side of things. So yes, those calories should be on there. The feeding guide that's on there is for the average pet with the average activity level and the average nutrition. But many pets are not average. Many pets are sedentary, and so maybe they don't need to eat everything that's on there. So have involve your vet in that discussion, and they can help you if they need to pull back a little bit on the amount that you're feeding. We can, and it's something you can check at home too. There's something called a body condition score that you can do at home, and we can provide a link to that on some of the charts of how to do that. But body condition score is more important, I think, than your pet's weight, because a Yorkie is going to have an ideal weight that's very different than a Great Dane. So body condition is something that shouldn't vary across breeds. Basically, when you're looking at your dog or cat, you want to be able to feel all of the ribs fairly easily without much fat covering over there at all. There should be a nice waist behind the ribs, a nice tuck under the belly where it comes up. Not so much to the point where you're starting to see the tops of the backbone or the hip bones. That's how you know you're too skinny. But you should be able to see that nice abdominal tuck, that nice waist, and feel the ribs easily. And that's how you know that your pet's at a good weight.
Okay. And that is the body condition score?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then no, go ahead.
I was going to say there's one other thing that I get asked about all the time on pet food labels, and it comes down to, well, how much protein?
I was just about to ask that.
Yeah. So if you actually look, they list protein and fat, but they don't actually list how much protein and fat. If you look at it, it actually says maximum or minimum, which can vary widely as far as how much protein or how much fat is actually in there. So they really don't mean much, because when you're looking at a human nutritional label, you're looking at the average protein, the average fat. In a pet food label, that's not the same thing. Those are minimums and maximums. So as long as if they say it's a minimum of 10% protein, but it could easily be 30, 40, 50%, and that's perfectly fine on a pet food label, or a maximum of of 20% fat. I'm just making up numbers.
So I guess if someone says
very different,
how much protein does my pet need? That doesn't really, if they're using traditional, commercially available pet food, the answer to the question of how much protein does my pet need is really almost irrelevant, because you can't find the answer of how much you're feeding it.
It is almost irrelevant. I would definitely agree with that. I mean, there are some higher protein pet foods out there. The the point is, though, if it's a well-balanced food, it's really more, the protein should be in proportion to the calories. If you've got a really active dog that needs a lot of protein, guess what? They need a lot of calories too. And so as you feed more of that food, they're going to get more protein. And so feeding a high protein food is really generally not necessary. It can sometimes be harmful, although not usually. But for certain diseases, like with liver or kidney disease, excess protein can really be harmful. And I would also kind of circle back to when we were talking about sustainability and ethics. I mean, feeding a high protein food does put more of a strain on world food production. It does put more of a strain on agriculture production and the environmental concerns it takes to make that pet food. So as a general rule, high protein, probably not harmful, but really probably not necessary. And you really can't even tell that from the packaging anyway.
And so getting to the packaging and kind of how to select a pet food, walk us through the basics and things like that.
So I mentioned earlier the World Small Animal Veterinary Association. So that is an international group of veterinarians that are not affiliated with any particular pet food company or manufacturers, where all of these veterinarians got together and these specialists who sat down and developed a guideline for nutrition. And part of that guideline is they created a kind of one-page sheet that helps. That says, it's called Selecting the Best Food for Your Pet, and again, we can link to that. And then the Pet Nutrition Alliance that I mentioned as well, who are kind of affiliated with the WSAVA, they also have taken those recommendations and then made a chart of all of the manufacturers and those answers to the questions. Because the guideline from the WSAVA is just a list of questions. That's all it is. But it's things like, does your pet food company have a full-time nutritionist? What are their credentials? Are they, actual boarded veterinary nutritionist, or are they somebody who took a class at the community college and now calls themselves a nutritionist? Who then actually formulates the foods? Who really, develops the recipes? Who manufactures the food? Do you own the manufacturing plant, or do you outsource it to a co-packer? Do you have it made overseas? Do you make it here? Do you do feeding trials for your food? Or if you're not doing feeding trials, are you testing the food by formulation, meaning, like I talked about earlier, plugging it all into a computer? Or are you taking the finished product and actually doing an analysis of it? What kind of quality controls do you do, for consistency and quality, not only of the finished product, but also all of the ingredients that are going into it before they get added to it? Are you, is your company able to give a complete nutrient analysis of all the foods that you sell? And does your company participate in peer-reviewed research, that is publicly available, that has been reviewed by other veterinarians that are not affiliated with your company, that can actually look at the science that's going into your foods? That's basically the sum up of what the World Small Animal Veterinary Association recommends. The Pet Nutrition Alliance then takes all of those questions and distills it down for all of the companies. And it's shocking when I first found this out, but there are only 2 pet food manufacturers that actually meet every single criteria, that do feeding trials, that have a board-certified veterinary nutritionist full-time on staff. There are only 2 companies in the U.S. Of the hundreds of companies that are out there, there are only 2. Those 2 companies are Royal Canin and Purina. Those are the only 2. Now, Hills is kind of the third. They don't own 100% of their manufacturing. They own about 96% of their manufacturing. So they're commonly listed as kind of a number 3. But the only 2 that actually have gone the steps to meet all of the criteria are those two.
Would that, I'm sure there's other companies that would be really reputable companies. They just may not have all of those boxes checked. Or how do you feel about that?
Well, so my concern is that we've actually started seeing issues with some of the smaller companies and the boutique companies that maybe, I'm sure the best intention is there. I mean, nobody gets into a pet food business to do anything other than provide the best nutrition they can for pets. I think we can generally accept, that everybody's in this for the right reasons, or we can at least extend them, that credit. But the smaller companies, especially the ones that are, kind of popping up newer, that haven't had time to do the testing and to actually, feed those tried and true diets. We've started to see some fairly serious health issues that have only popped up in the last few years because of that. So, when I'm making food recommendations to pets, to pet owners, I advise trying to stick to one of those two companies. My hope is that all pet food companies will get to the point where they can meet those requirements and that it can be safe. But in good conscience, I really can't recommend brands beyond those, because I personally have seen pets develop very serious health conditions that would have been prevented had they been on a different diet.
And is that because the balance wasn't there, or certain ingredients were included that shouldn't have been, or vice versa?
It's complicated. And, the biggest one we're seeing right now is a certain kind of heart disease called dilated cardiomyopathy. And we don't have all the answers yet. So we don't know why it's happening. We haven't been able to figure out the mechanism of why certain diets seem to be causing this. We haven't even been able to prove that certain diets are causing this. But we have shown a very troublesome correlation where only certain brands of food are being linked to this. And some of those other brands, like the two I mentioned, the Royal Canin and Purina, have huge market shares of pet food, but none of these case reports and none of these pets that are developing this heart condition. And so, again, we don't know why that is, but it does speak to the level of science that goes behind the foods and everything that goes into a food before it gets released to the public, where it concerns me that maybe some of these trendier boutique type foods may not be as good for our pets as we want them to be.
And the resource guide that the Small Animal Veterinary Association has pulled together, thank goodness they have, because that's a lot of questions, and it's a lot of heavy research that the consumer would have to do into every food company. And so the fact that this is pulled together is fantastic. Does that resource guide, if they don't meet all of those, does it say which of these they fulfill and which they don't, so that the consumer can kind of see where they're lacking?
Right. So the World Small Animal Veterinary Association does not actually list whether companies meet these criteria or not. The Pet Nutrition Alliance has taken it a step further and used those guidelines from WSAVA to make this chart. And so they tell you what they meet and what they don't meet. And, it tells you who formulates their foods and which criteria they do meet or not. And so that's where, I'm getting my information as far as those only two companies that actually have the veterinary nutritionist and everything else that I mentioned. Okay.
No, I think that's an incredible resource. Thanks for sharing that with us too. And so when someone is looking at, there's the brand to consider, there's what goes into the company and what their commitment is to the nutrition research and, ability to catch these kind of problems before it enters or doesn't enter the food. So once you've kind of narrowed down your company and you're looking at food, is there, talk to us a little bit about dry food versus wet food. What's the difference? Which one to use and when?
Yeah, so I mean, both wet and dry food are going to meet the same nutritional requirements. There are differences between wet and dry, but from an overall nutritional standpoint, you should be fine pretty much with either one of them. The benefits of dry is, number one, it's more economical. It's easier to store, it's easier to keep, and on a per calorie basis, it's less expensive in the long run most of the time. The other benefit for dry food is that if the kibbles are large enough and your pet is actually crunching down on them and chewing, that chewing action is beneficial for dental health. It's sort of like a natural brushing action that can help prevent dental disease. Now, the kibbles have to be large enough, and they have to chew them. If they're swallowing them whole, then it doesn't really matter.
Right.
Wet food, on the other hand, it's going to be more expensive. I mean, a lot on a per calorie basis. It is more expensive. There's more water in wet food. That's why it's wet. There's higher amounts of water, and it can be beneficial in some cases. So, for example, if your pet is missing a lot of teeth and can't really effectively chew hard food, then definitely wet is the way to go. In certain pets that have urinary problems where they need more water in their diet, then getting water through food and not just from drinking is a great way to make sure they get enough water. Wet food tends to be higher in protein and fat, so we do need to be careful, especially for our pets that have more sensitive digestion, where the fat can really overwhelm their digestive tract. So we got to be careful on that front. But it can definitely be a good choice for a lot of pets. And one thing I will say is that, and cats especially, cats, whatever food they eat as kittens is pretty much what they're going to eat for the rest of their life. And so if you start them out on dry food only, and they never see wet food until they're a few years old, they will likely want nothing to do with it, which is fine. If there hasn't been anything definitively shown for dry food to be any better or worse for cats than wet food. But in certain cases, like I mentioned, urinary issues or pets that may have other health conditions like diabetes, where a wet food is actually going to be beneficial. You want to make sure that you've introduced your kitten to wet food early and dry food, so that later on in life, if you need to feed one or the other for a medical reason, they're more likely to accept
familiar with it. Is wet food, is the protein ratio higher? It seems just on appearance that wet food has a greater density of protein, dry food has a greater density of carb, but
so that is generally true. In order to make the pellets of dry food, you need a certain amount of carbohydrates for it all to kind of stick together. So it's impossible really to make a low carb dry food. That being said, not all wet foods are low in carbohydrates, especially, those ones that have a lot of the sauces or gravies in that's all sugar and starch, and can be really high. And so I more focus on that. The wet versus dry for me only comes into play more for pets with health conditions. So
other than that, it's more preference of the pet.
It's more preference of the pet and preference of the owner and what they can tolerate, what they like, all of that.
It would also seem like a dog like my sister-in-law's dog, who has just this voracious appetite, that there's a lot more work that goes into the dry food, and it takes her longer. Whereas the wet food, she would lap it up almost with like one tongue's worth. And it seems like for the animals that weight's an issue, is dry food better, or would it be a mix of the two, like mixing together wet and dry?
The answer is it depends.
Okay.
So actually, wet food for obese pets, especially for obese cats, can actually help keep them fuller because there's so much water in there that can actually help keep them full with eating less calories.
I guess, and the protein
portion
and fat.
control.
Yeah.
Right, and
Okay.
the portion control can be easier with wet food as well. So in some cases, yes, actually, wet food is better for pets losing weight.
Because you
On the
open the
flip side,
can versus how much are you measuring out of this giant bag. Okay.
exactly. And so on dry food though, those can be sometimes, especially ones that are labeled for overweight management or low calorie, they can put a lot more fiber in there. So the same thing on the as human side, more fiber in there can help keep you full without raising the calories that much. So there are benefits to both wet and dry for weight loss, but it all comes down to the individual pet.
And we talked about treats earlier, but is there anything to add to that? Is how much of an issue of this is this where owners might have an otherwise healthful diet, but then the treats kind of sneak their way in? Or is there like an upper limit or a guideline you have for that in addition to the regular food?
So the generally recommended amount is that treats should not be more than about 10% of the diet on a calorie basis.
Okay.
And so the reason that's tricky is, going back to especially our little small dogs, where they're not eating many calories in a day, and one of those treats may be 50 calories, 100 calories in some of the, those bigger treats, and that could be half the calories that pet needs in a day. So that's not okay. So we do need to keep in mind, we do need to really go through the steps of figuring out, okay, how many calories is my pet supposed to be getting into a day? How many calories are in my pet's food? How many calories are in the treats? If you can't find that information, then probably shouldn't be feeding that food or treat anyway.
Right. If they're not listing it.
So not more than 10%. And there are some, human foods that can be acceptable as treats, again, as long as they're not more than 10% of the diet. My dogs love baby carrots. That's their treat. They'll get that as a reward for, going potty outside, and they come back in, they get a baby carrot. So that's a great treat in moderation. Celery is a good treat. You can take zucchini and cut it in half, or a cucumber and cut it in half, and that can be a great lower calorie treat for pets as well, and they love that crunch a lot of times. So you certainly can have treats, and there's a place for treats in moderation. We also need to keep in mind about dental health. So especially a lot of the bones and harder treats and chews out there can be dangerous for pets' teeth. So I say the general rule is you should be able to take your fingernail and press on it and make an indentation in whatever treat or toy you're giving your pet, so to know that it's safe for their teeth. But there's a resource called the Veterinary Oral Health Council, and again, this is something we can link to your listeners. But the Veterinary Oral Health Council, or VOHC, has a website where this is veterinarians and veterinary dentists that will take research and product information from any company that's out there, review it, and if they find that, number one, it does what the product is claiming for dental health and it's safe for pets and their teeth, then they'll put their stamp of approval on it. And they actually list all of the products that they've approved for both dogs and cats, and you can get that information free on their website. You can also, if you're walking up and down the supermarket or the pet food store, if you look for that seal, a lot of companies that have gone through the steps to get that seal are very proud of it, and they'll put that VOHC seal right there on their packaging. And that's another way you can know that this is safe for pets' teeth. But things like bones, hooves, antlers, bully sticks, I generally recommend staying away from those kind of things.
And you had mentioned the treats that you give. Talk to us a little bit about home-cooked DIY pet food. Do you have a lot of your pet owners who want to make their pet food from scratch? And how do you feel about it overall?
We talk about it comes up every now and then. Thankfully, I think most people, whether it's from awareness through discussions or maybe from laziness, don't want to make their pets food. But I'm actually okay with that. There was a study done that looked at about 200 different published recipes that are out there from the internet, from textbooks, from all over. And it looked at 200 pet food recipes. And 95% of those recipes were deficient in at least one nutrient. And many were deficient in many nutrients. So it is very hard to make a well-balanced pet food by yourself. For certain times where pet owners are adamant that they really want to do that for one reason or another, what I recommend is working with a board-certified veterinary nutritionist on developing a recipe. And then once you develop that recipe with the nutritionist, sticking to that recipe. There was another study that was done that looked at pet owners that did work with a nutritionist and did get that recipe, and they went back to those same pet owners a year later. And of those pet owners, only 13% were still feeding the same recipe and hadn't made any alterations that adjusted it. So if you do want to do it yourself, do it the right way, involve a nutritionist, get a recipe or even more than one recipe, and then stick to that recipe. And there's the American College of Veterinary Nutrition that has an online directory where they list all of their boarded diplomats, including the ones that are willing to work with you remotely, that
Very
you can
cool.
schedule a consultation with, and they can go through everything with you over the phone to make that diet for
really,
your pet.
Like treating yourself, just like what you're saying to look for in a pet food company. If you're going to do it yourself, you can't think that you're going to wing it any better than the boutique companies are. So asking for that professional guidance. Has there been? Yeah, no, go ahead.
There's also one other resource that I'll mention. It's a website that's run by a veterinary nutritionist out of UC Davis, California, called balanceit.com. And so what they do is it's a free resource. You can go on there and you can put in the recipe of what you're doing. I'm doing this much chicken and then this much spinach or apple, and you put everything else in that you're doing, and then it then spits out, kind of like what those pet food companies do, what your pet's diet is deficient in and what it has too much of or not enough of, and it will go on there. And what that company does, Balance It, is they also sell customized vitamin and nutrient blends, where if you do want to make it at home, you put in your recipe and they say, okay, well, in order to make it complete and balanced, we'll make a custom blend that you sprinkle this powder and mix it in with what you're doing so that you can have a balanced food at home. Which
is a great compromise for someone who's passionate about doing that too, and kind of gives that peace of mind. Has there been any just bizarre stories of things that people have told you they've made, or something that's so elaborate and you're just like, what the heck? How is this even happening?
Not really that much. I have, had a few that, they do make some fairly elaborate recipes, and, they plan for it, and they on the weekends they do their meal planning.
Meal prep.
And they meal prep and batch it out for the whole week, and they have their measured containers. And honestly, if you're looking to do it yourself, it almost requires that amount of work to do it the right way.
Right.
I will tell you, I have seen where people have kind of gone more toward the raw side, where they feed their pets a raw diet. I've seen some interesting parasites and foodborne illness, bacteria and salmonella, that pets have gotten from doing that. So typically caution against the raw feeding. But I have had a few stories with the raw for sure.
And are there other things to avoid on the topic of human foods, like human foods that are toxic, that we need to make sure not to include in our pets' diets?
So there are definitely human foods that are dangerous to our pets. And so probably the biggest one that everybody pretty much knows about is chocolate. But along the lines of chocolate, coffee, and anything containing caffeine, your pets can be very, very sensitive to. So we need to be careful with those things. High fat ingredients, there's been a lot of talk of things like coconut oil. In moderation, it's probably fine, but it is a fat. And so other things containing fat like nuts or nut butters, steak, bacon, those high fat ingredients can be very taxing on the digestive system of pets that aren't used to it. So I caution against those things.
So if someone has like a treat, like I'm envisioning these or these toys that they'll put peanut butter inside of it, would it be just put a small amount, or would you say don't even do it?
Yeah, so peanut butter can be fine. Peanut butter, especially if you like put it in one of those treats like those toys like a Kong and stick it in the freezer, so they have to work for
Right.
it. I think that's great. It's in moderation now,
Right.
so everything in moderation on that front. You do need to be careful of some of the sugar-free peanut butters. They sometimes use a sweetener called xylitol.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
So xylitol is a sweetener that has benefits for human health, but can be dangerous to dogs. And it's in a lot of like the sugar-free gums that are the dental gums, or in sugar-free peanut butter is the other place we see it commonly, where it can be very, very toxic to dogs. So we want to avoid that.
What happens with that with dogs with xylitol? What is the reaction?
With xylitol, so what happens, it messes with their blood sugar. So if they eat a little bit of xylitol, it can make their blood sugar drop very low, and they can get hypoglycemic because their body's releasing all of this insulin thinking that there's sugar when there's actually not. So that can be very dangerous. Then there's a delayed reaction where then their liver has to metabolize this xylitol, and it can actually cause destruction of the liver and liver failure as a delayed reaction to it. So once you get past the blood sugar, you're still not through the woods because there could be a liver issue on the horizon in the next hours or days. So it's
serious.
Tiny amounts of xylitol probably are safe, but as a general rule, we recommend just avoiding it.
And as you said, the sugar-free gum, it's also big in sugar-free mints, which would be really easy for pets to get into. What about macadamia nuts? I've read about this.
Yeah, so along with other nuts, they can be high in fat is the concern with macadamia nuts. So as a rule, we just recommend that you avoid it. There's the ASPCA has a whole division that's a toxicology division where they employ boarded veterinary toxicologists, and they run a pet poison control number where if you're concerned that your pet got into something that they shouldn't have, you can always call them. They do charge a fee, but you can talk with the specialist. They have all of the information in their database. They're can tell you, oh, yes, you need to go see your veterinarian right now, or no, that's not enough to worry about. You're probably fine. So anytime your pet eats something you're concerned about, I would call them. And then they also have great lists on their website where you can read more about specific human foods or toxins.
And these are all just incredible resources. I've just got notes for all of these that we can share with our listeners. And supplements. I know I've heard, pet owners will say they supplement with fish oil. One of our dietitian colleagues gives her dog fish oil daily, or turmeric for inflammation, glucosamine for joints, probiotics for skin. What's your thoughts on these?
So as a general rule, for most healthy pets, supplements are not going to be necessary if your pet is being fed a well-balanced diet. There are some supplements for certain health conditions that we absolutely do use. For example, my own dog right now is having a problem with her liver. So she's taking a supplement that's derived from the milk thistle plant that has some antioxidant properties. And so, yes, supplements do have their place in certain health conditions. For healthy pets, they're generally not necessary. Another example would be for dogs with arthritis. So glucosamine chondroitin supplements are very, very common. They're very popular. they might help. That the science is actually sort of mixed onto exactly how much they may help. They probably won't hurt. Fish oil supplements for heart disease, kidney disease, certain cancers, for skin conditions. Yes, so fish oil supplements have been shown to be beneficial. It's all about the dose, and it's all about the sourcing of it when it comes to fish oil. Got to remember, fish oil is oil. Oil is fat, and like we talked about a little bit earlier, fat can be very hard on the digestive system of a lot of pets. So we got to be cautious when we're doing that. But there are guidelines out there for fish oil. But at the end of the day, when it comes to any supplement, talk to your vet. So your vet can give you pointers. They can give you guidelines. They can give you dosing information on supplements. One thing I will tell you to avoid is some of the newer or trendier supplements. When it comes to regulation of supplements, same as on the human side, they're regulated very differently than drugs or medication. Whereas, they are required to be shown to be harmful before they're pulled from the market, as opposed to the medicine side, where they have to be proven to be safe before they can be on the market. So some of the newer ones that haven't been studied that long, I would caution you for jumping on the bandwagon, and again, talk to your vet first. That's not to say some of the newer things like CBD may not, may have their place once you talk to your veterinarian. But certainly, I've seen a fair share of toxicities from things like CBD. So again, the take home when it comes to supplements is talk to your vet.
And that's really the take home for all. And as you said, these are things that people are thinking about, they're wondering about, they're Googling. But when they go for their normal pet checkups, they may just be kind of going through the normal motions of that and not thinking that you guys can be such an incredible resource on this. So when it comes to diet or weight loss or weight gain, or if someone does want to make their own food and seeing if it's balanced, ask about it, dietary supplements. There's just, I think that's my takeaway from this is you guys are so much more of a resource than what it sounds like that's top of mind as people walk in a lot of times. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that would be good for our listeners to hear that you want to share?
I think we could probably talk all day. This is my life. This is what I do day in and day out. But I think we've kind of covered the high points. We'll certainly make everything that we talked about, all those resources available to your listeners so that they can look at it and do their own research. And at the end of the day, bring those questions to their vet so that they can have that conversation.
And you mentioned your dogs. What types of dogs do you have?
So I have two dogs. I have my old girl, Zoe, who is a pug. She's approaching 12 years old. She'll be this year. And then my middle-aged girl, Abigail, is my golden retriever.
And are those the two pets you have? Any others?
Yeah, those are the two we have right now. I've got 3 human children. So that's enough to be getting on with right now.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time with this. This has been fascinating, thorough information. And I love that it's so much information that you're sharing for us to hear right now. And then even more that we can have at our fingertips for resources as things come up that, we're looking for in the future. So this has been incredible. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Happy to help.
All right. Talk to you soon. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm so grateful to Dr. Levy for joining us today. He is a wealth of knowledge. It's fascinating who realized there's just so much in the world of pet nutrition. And he talked about a lot of different links and resources that are just really invaluable information. So we've included the links that he talked about in the show notes of this episode. And let me know what you think as you incorporate any of these into your pet's diet, or you're making changes into your pet's diet, or there was stuff that you learned or stuff that really drove home a point or changed something that you're doing for the better. I would love to hear about it. I am registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. If you would like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And join us next week for another dose of fueled wellness and nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.